Natalie can mute everybody, I think,
Yes.
if it gets bad. And ideally, in the chat window in WebEx, before you want to say something at the mic, please say you'd like to say something at the mic. And we can all notice that pause and not step on each other. Okay, so wrong window. The presenters are going to end up with slides presented by me, so they need to say, as George Michael would do, Michelson would do, click so we can flip the slides like this. Here's your note well.
Lake.
All of the slides should be on the on the materials page by now. So I don't think we have any other agenda stuff to add than the 5 presentations we're going to talk about today. Starting with a panel, then I don't need to read these. Everyone can read these. Some draft status, which seems fine. Again, you can read these offline. I think maybe it's time to start the panel. Is everyone from the panel here, hopefully? We go get those slides. Okay, so Randy, that's you, and we'll start. Say click when you want to change.
Got the message. Okay, so we've had some, for the last 10 years running the RPKI, we've had some issues. We're going to have a panel that pretty much everybody but Joe is to blame for them, because the rest of the people, plus Chris and a bunch of other people in this room, are part of the original misdesign. So 20 lashes. Nick, click. Click. So we're going to cover 3 items. The manifest oopsie, manifests and what to do about them, and CRLs. I'm going to set each one up, and then the panelists in turn or en masse or whatever they feel like, maybe 5 minutes or 10 on each subject. And we only have 40 minutes total. I, of course, like everyone else, have opinions. The OPSUPSI, the NCC manifest OPSUPSI is an OPSUPSI. They happen all the time. The RIRs will learn that responsibility is at the top of an apex, is tough. They're stepping up to it. Year after year, it gets better. There have been OPSUPSIs for every RIR. There have been OPSUPSIs for every child CA. Their OPSUPSIs are not numerable. Okay, we love them anyway. Blame does not move packets. So we need to take a look at the checking and care that the root DNS people do before they push, and automate that up the sorry, right, and George, and so on and so forth. This is life in the big city when the RIRs decided to take on a role in routing. Who on the panel would care to speak first? And
okay, so this is Russ. I think that we know that the CRL needs to be put out according to the CP for 2 reasons. If you added to that, 1, a internet numbering resource is removed, or 2, if your key is compromised. So we need to have these, and we just need to make sure that everything is consistent at the time of publication, I think the example that Randy gave used in the DNS is a good one. Just develop the tools to make sure things are consistent before you hit publish.
By the way, comments from other people are quite welcome.
Here, well, Russ, that the connection was breaking up.
One comment. This is Rob. Manifests have this one extra gotcha. It's just a technical thing you have to make sure of. At one point, when we started this, people were using very short signature lifetimes for the EE certs and manifests. And that was a serious problem. It made manifests hard fail the way a certificate does rather than go stale the way a CRL does. I think at this point everybody has gotten that memo, but if anybody hasn't, it's important to use a long signature lifetime for the manifest EE cert, so the semantics are basically the same as for a CRL, where it goes stale gradually rather than just falling off the cliff.
Two things. Number one is, Chris, would you click, please? Because clearly people want to talk about manifests and CRLs and not beat up the RIRs for not suiting. Click. Secondly, Warren was queued up. Hey, speak up.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, I agree that we do need more tooling, and this needs to be more stable. But I'm not entirely sure that the comparison to the DNS route is a good analogy, because I think that the rate of change on that is much lower, and so I think it's more feasible to do some additional sort of manual checking. So definitely needs to be better, but I'm not sure that that's a great analogy.
Who are you, by the way?
Warren Kamari. I guess I said that before I started speaking, but I guess it was too quiet.
You said it before you clicked your off mute. Okay, so in general, manifests were poorly documented. Steve Kent is Steve. Are you saying you wanted to speak?
Yes. So
Do
this
so.
is Steve Kent. In response to what Warren noted, I agree that the frequency of change for manifests that has been adopted in the RPKI is fairly frequent. And so one has to balance the ability to test that against the operational requirements of rolling them as quickly as people have decided they wish to. But I also think that the kind of tests that whoops, had a little whoops there for a moment, that we were talking about are principally automated. So, and Russ can tell me if that's not what he had in mind, but I think the notion here is to have a set of software that you can run over all the products that are published, updated, etc., and then just go ahead and run that before pushing it out. I think that's what Russ had in mind, and that's certainly what I would suggest.
Yes, that's what I had in mind.
Steve, can you restate the last sentence one more time, please?
Yes, what I was saying is that what I had in mind and what Russ has agreed he had envisioned is some software that you point at the collection of signed objects that you were about to publish and run it, and it's very anal about checking for consistency through all these objects. So it would basically be a form of relying party software, but perhaps a little better documented in terms of, not better documented, but better at providing error feedback to warn the CA or the publication point maintainer, the repository operator, of any potential inconsistencies. before pushing out the new set of signed options. That's what Russ and I are talking about.
Thank you.
I think VeriSign and pushing out and the other top TLVs have fairly seriously automated checks too. When doing some of these the RPKI RFCs, we stole from lessons that DNS taught. So
Randy, I actually believe there's two sets of tests. One run by ICANN and then another set run by VeriSign. And I don't think we need to have the two-role, generator publisher thing going on here. But I do think each time we have an experience like this, the set of tests that is run should grow.
yep, just like regression tests for software. The publishers will learn. Anybody like Natalie or George, et cetera, to run a Apex CA, care to comment? I don't see anybody in the mic queue. So manifests 6486 needs to be updated. Shame on us. And we don't have authors to do this, and it really requires PKI clue. So, for instance, I'm not volunteering, even if I had the time. Yeah, you want to speak, Steve? Yeah.
Yeah, John asked the question on Jeff about what needs updating, and that's a perfectly good question. It's section 6, relying party use of manifests. As one of the co-authors, and you have both, you have two of the co-authors of the document on this, George Michelson's child as well. When we got to that part, we struggled with it, in all honesty, because there were trade-offs. If we pushed to be very strict about some things, we were especially concerned that this would result in potential denial of service of a particular form, that is, a relying party discarding lots of stuff because there was some issue with the manifest in terms of what was present, what was missing, etc. So we provided trade-offs. We tried to discuss what these were, but we recognized that there was going to have to be a lot of experience gained in the RPKI by relying parties to figure out what would have to be done eventually. So I completely agree with Randy's observation that it's now time to go back and produce the new RFC, where I'd like to believe that everything up to section 6 is okay, but I'm certainly open to people pointing out things that they think need to be changed elsewhere. But mostly to go back based on discussions in the working group to say, okay, there were choices. You could do A or B here, and we decided A is the right thing to do. And we started that discussion on the mailing list a few weeks ago, but it needs to continue and come to some hard decisions, proposed text, so that this can move on to the next phase.
Really appreciate you coming off the bench on that one, Steve. And you and Russ both coming out of retirement to help you. And hope that if we find one of us to hold the pen, I think you will continue to at least advise, even if you won't be willing to do the heavy lifting. That was a polite question.
Oh, I missed the question part. Yes. I will be happy to review revised text and provide feedback on it. Just as on the list, I tried to go back and look at the various situations in terms of what's missing, what's stale, what's current, etc. Not to offer suggestions about how it should operate, but rather to say, let's see if we can create a taxonomy of what various combinations of states are of things. And with that in mind, find a way forward by saying, well, we're putting a stake in the ground. I recognize for my part that I was thinking more in terms of traditional security concerns about denial of service. And I think George Michelson on the list has made a very persuasive argument that the real concern here is that if there's an indication based on a current manifest that certain objects that should be at a publication point are missing, then what can you trust about that entire publication point now? Because the objects that are missing, you don't know what they are, and they could influence how you interpret the rest of the information, both at that publication point and at subordinate publication points in the PKI hierarchy. And that was not the way we were thinking about it. Certainly it's not the way I was thinking about it back in 2012. When I wrote this, I was concerned about minimizing circumstances under which we threw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. And in this case, well, maybe the baby needs to be replaced.
The baby's an alien. Yep. Either the publication is born or you've been attacked. Yeah, we're doing okay for time. Somebody else?
So this is Russ. I'm willing to help, but I can't be the lead author on anything in this regard. Just have too many other commitments at the moment.
Yep. Really appreciated with you two keeping your eyes on it. Why don't you state your question out loud? Yo.
Sorry. So updating an RFC of this size and complexity can easily take 1 or 2 years before we get close to publication. Is there anything we can do in the meantime to provide guidance that some of the validator implementers are explicitly looking for in a shorter time frame?
Well, looking at what happened a decade or so ago is, as the consensus forms in the working group, the code gets fixed, and that doesn't require the IETF sausage to be made.
I agree with Randy's observation. While you're absolutely correct that formal RFC publication of a new version will take a while, if we're focusing just on Section 6, and if we can get agreement in the working group on what the new Section 6 should say, then operators, if there's agreement, can go ahead and say, we're going to go ahead and start doing this, and we'll let the document make its way through the rest of the process. So I think the hardest part here really is just getting agreement on a new set of guidance that moves less with regard to our relying party behavior. And once there is agreement, if the working group chairs have essentially a last call and there's agreement, then I think that's a perfectly good time for software to be updated, etc., while the document makes its way through the rest of the process.
Speaking as someone who took 8 years to get an RFC through to change a constant from 4K to 64K. I'm patient with the IETF process, and we knew what had to be happened in the first 3 months. So, let's get agreement here and worry about the IETF sausage machine in a parallel universe. Are we going to have the conversation over chat? I'm not objecting, but is everyone actually seeing the chat? Because otherwise, Tim and George, you really should speak up verbally.
Okay, can people hear me? This is Tim, Virtuals and Nelnet Labs. So, yeah, what I said in the chat is that I think it will help if we move to a publication model using, well, as I'll propose later, RDP, because it will allow for deltas to be published atomically. So I think you can prevent a lot of the issues seen around glitches where serial and manifest and objects are inconsistent, if you will. It leaves other things to be considered, obviously, but I think it will help.
George?
So my comment in chat is that I think if we are focused on section 6, then specifically section 6.5, the last paragraph, represents a problem. It only has one normative word. It's a should result in a warning. And I think what we are going to need is much stricter language. I think that you are correct to focus on section 6. And I think the tabular construction of the cohesion of different states of prior state, manifest, CRL, current state, and a decision logic that is less subjective is probably the outcome people are looking for.
Steve?
Yes, 2 observations. I agree with George's observation that 6.5 is the really big issue that we seem to be dealing with here, and that we need to look throughout the whole section, but especially there, to try and use more normative language. And warnings, in the sense that I get from what I hear operators have expressed on this, is that warnings may not always be enough. They like more specific guidance about what to accept, what to reject, and we should just do that going forward. With regard to Tim's comment, I'm not sure that I'm convinced that rsync is really the big problem here. And I say that because in the document guidance, there is the observation of what you probably should do, which is to marshal all the objects for a consistent view of the publication point, and then change and put that out atomically. And yes, there is a possibility that the line party could be fetching in the course of this transition, but my belief, and I didn't write the software, so I don't know, I'd ask somebody on the chat like Rob Austin did, is that relying party software might well be able to detect this inconsistency, go back and do a refetch. So while RDP may provide a long-term preferable solution in terms of minimizing the likelihood of that, it's not clear to me that the problems that we're seeing are principally a result of rsync.
This is Russ. In particular, if new objects were put in a staging area, validation tools were run against them, and then the staging area was transitioned to the place where rsync sees it, I think that kind of a pipeline would allow rsync to work. That's not to say I'm opposed to what Tim's proposing, but I don't think it's the core of the problem for similar reasons to what Steve just said.
I think the 2 issues are orthogonal. It's basic software engineering is update the data so it's consistent, move it out of staging to current. And If you can't do that, get a job somewhere else.
Get a job somewhere else, huh?
Seriously, software engineering 101. The data is consistent,
This
period.
is Rob. Sorry, I've had my hand up for a while and I don't have this hand raised.
Sorry, with all the stuff in the chatter, if people would stop typing into chat and just use it for hand raise, then I'll be able to help people not get squelched. Rob?
Two things. First of all, I'm willing to review. I don't have time to be a primary author. Secondly, I'm actually more on Tim's side on the RIDP thing. There are two issues. One is the issue, what a publication is, actually changed a little bit when we bought RIDP, and not conceptually at the high level, but in terms of implementation. Because with rsync, you have the concept of, well, basically there's this directory that's got stuff in it, and you might have things that are in the directory but not in the manifest. With RDP, the way you determine what's in the publication point in time versus the manifest are like just this big bucket of objects. So some of the semantics actually change a little bit there, and it would actually be useful to know whether we're trying to do this, including rsync, or we're doing it post phase out of rsync. Just in terms of what the done is possible. But unfortunately, it's not really possible. Atomic rsync just doesn't work that way. Part of the problem is that you're at the mercy of the implementation. You don't really know what order things are going to get fetched in. You know, so you can do atomic writes and renews and all of that at the software level. What actually shows up on the other side, you don't know. You're within a certain window. It's correct. One could go back and refetch, but it's a non-terminated process. Assume that they're doing a question, just always a slightly inconsistent state. So based on implementation, we never tried to do that. We just best job we can stay together with what we're going to fetch this time. We figured we'll try next cycle. I'm not sure it's correct in that regard. We're still going to have to teach them publisher. So you're still going to have inconsistencies between different publication sites.
Whoever's got their mic on and is typing, turn your friggin' mic off.
But you know, within a single publication stream, it should be closer to a transactional model.
Just a time check, Randy. You have 9 minutes.
Yeah, I know. Next, click. So last we have CRLs. They're critical. We like them. They're well understood because unlike manifests, they come from the history of PKI. So they're better defined and we don't have the holes. Okay. The idea to remove them is making massive chaos in the RFC hierarchy. Let's see who was first. It looks like George. George, off mute.
So I think it's important that we recognize an aspect of the distinction between positive and negative statements. All cryptographic statements are in effect only positive. I want you to believe me, here's my SIG. You don't have the anti-set of, I want you to believe me, here's my crap SIG. You only have, is my good SIG. So it is always a positive cryptographic test. Is this a valid statement? And it invites the necessity of having the ability to make negative statements. Now, Randy, you famously said, stop inventing things. when we tried to invoke creating negative statements where the negative was a negative assertion in routing. So we only have positive assertions at this stage as the targets that get made in our system. CRLs are a negative assertion. Do not accept this otherwise valid thing. And I think that is completely distinct from what a manifest does. A manifest does not have a list of things not to be accepted. It is only a positive statement of acceptance of things. A CRL is necessary. So the idea of unwinding it, to me, makes no sense. It's necessary because all statements in cryptographic sense are valid. And this is the only tool we have to repudiate things that necessarily need to be withdrawn. End of statement.
Sorry. Thanks, George. Let me ask two questions then. Would anybody like to speak to either of the following two questions? One, is CRLs are poorly or underdefined? Two, is they're extraneous and should be removed? Otherwise, we can conclude.
So, Randy, this is Russ. I would think that maybe we ought to look at adding a paragraph to RFC 8211, which talks about what the consequences of suppressing a CRL are. I think we now know better what the consequences of suppressing a CRL are, and we got it. We missed some things. That's the only thing I think we should.
Jim? Jim?
Yes. So when I started making noises about CRLs, I was worried in particular about inconsistencies of, even if you publish stuff in a new directory and change over, there may be race conditions with validators getting things. That was my main concern, that there's now this circular thing when you need to validate a manifest. You need to find its CRL. You need to verify that the manifest itself is not revoked by that CRL, and then continue. And while I do see great value for CRLs in general, the point I was trying to make is that for things that are already on the manifest, if and only if we accept that that's the signed firm list, it doesn't make sense to publish something on a manifest and then also revoke it in a CRL. All that being said and done, I can live with the CRLs, especially because I think they have purposes outside of what's published inside the RPKI repository, and there may be use cases there. See the RPSL signature document, for example. In any case, I may be taking too much time here, but my biggest concern here is that with all the things in section 6 of the manifest, I think if that gets addressed, most of my issues are addressed. Because all the local policy in terms of what we do if, that makes me nervous. So I hope that this makes it a bit more clear where I come from.
Anyone else?
This is Steve. Yeah, with regard to Russ's suggestion for RFC 8211, I'll get in touch with my co-author on that and see about issuing errata to address the comment that was made.
I think it's probably a one-paragraph update, Steve.
Okay. Agreed.
Anybody else before we close the gate? Thank you.
Randy, sorry to interrupt you. Job raised his hand.
Sorry. No?
A point about the concept of local policy. I think maybe this is a misunderstanding in my mind, or maybe this is in a broader sense. But in the last few weeks, having deployed some RPKI stuff in a network, the concept of local policy for us is expressed through Slurm. That is the equivalent of local policy. And this concept of having local policy in the validation process itself may not really exist. I don't know any operator that is using this local policy concept or the liberty that some of the RFCs offer to their advantage in a productive way. So if we revise some of the language around this, I think the phrase local policy should perhaps be omitted or removed, because local policy in context of routers for us network operators is what we put into the Slurm file or what we type into the router, but not validation policy. Does that make sense?
It does to me. This is Steve Kent.
Well, thank you, unfortunately, all gentlemen. Back to you, Chris.
Jay has a question. Working hard.
Oops. Sorry. Jay? Mute, Jay. No, skip the rest of the slides. Those are just backup. Jay? Unmute.
He typed into Jabber the words, Tim's comment is interesting. Does it make sense that manifests can be revoked by CRLs?
Their certificates.
Yeah, the
And
manifest contains an embedded E cert. All certs issued by a CA can be revoked by the CA. So yes, it's just the way it works if we're going to do a PKI.
Tim?
Does it make sense for a manifest to include a CRL and its hash where that CRL revokes that manifest?
No, that would be an inconsistency, and we shouldn't do that. But is it possible, is what Steve just answered. That after it's issued, could the signer's certificate be revoked?
yeah, I think you need to distinguish between what makes sense in terms of not trying to rewrite X509 versus what would just be an insane thing to publish. Okay. I think we want to keep the CRO list to all their certificates, including the E-cert that's in the manifest, because otherwise we'll rewrite X509 that don't go there. As a separate issue, I think it would be extremely silly to publish a CRL and manifest pair where the CRL revokes the manifest. It would be a dumb thing to do, so don't do that. But it's a distinction between that and whether or not the protocol should allow it. I think the protocol has to allow it because that's 509.
Ruger, did you have a question or you just wanted to go with what's in the chat?
We can do additional constraints beyond the natural X509, I think. and enforcing that by, say, consistency checks, as suggested by Steve, probably makes sense.
Yes.
Chris, kick us off.
Okay, I think that's the. Oh my God! Come on, Tim. Quick comment, and then I'll put Randy's slides up.
Okay, no, sorry about that. Well, okay, I think it's really good to look at checking consistency in the future, in future work that we do. And I think a possible locus for that is actually on a publication server where stuff is being sent to. I think you can add checks there, that deltas are consistent, that manifests don't revoke themselves in the CRL that they say is current, etc.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Randy. Your next slides.
Okie doke. Your usual authors list. Yesterday was a bad sysadmin day, so these slides are a little rushed. Next. Back in the NSF days, Curtis Vilmizar updated the backbone peering on Wednesday mornings. Routing could not change until next Wednesday morning. That was life. We do not remember it fondly. Next. Some of us remember when it took a day or two for DNS updates to propagate before we hacked in the notify mechanism. We do not remember it fondly. Next. As we roll out route origin validation using the RPKI, we should not do this again. And that's the state we're in. It can take 2 days for things to roll out. Now is the time to fix it before it really hurts people badly. Next. To remind you of the topology of how the data get from the user on the left to the router on the bottom right. Right? The user uses some application to update the CA software, which then publishes it in the resource PKI repository. Then relying parties gather it in something we often call a cache. They produce a validated cache, and that ends up being pushed to the router with the RPKI router protocol. You're going to see 6 variations on this slide. Next. These are the points we care about timing. Right? These are the points that influence how long it takes to get from the left side to the bottom right corner, which is where it influences the actual routing on the network. Next. So, how long do I have, Chris?
Sorry. I think it was 10 minutes, so maybe you have another 7. Also.
So I'm sorry, Tim and Jay, questions at the end, even though you're co-authors. So how long does it take from when I enter the data on Wright's webpage until it hits the bottom right? As an operator, I'm supposed to know that. And if I'm going to make a announcement change 4 days from now, I should know when I must enter and create the role. Next, click. The CA has to both publish it in the up-down protocol and publish it in the PKI. That should take seconds to a minute. Next, the relying parties have to gather. rsync is heavy on the server. Therefore, once an hour seems a reasonable compromise. RDP is much like 10 minutes seems reasonable. All these constants are what we're going to discuss in the next 6 months as we process this draft, right? These are just initial suggestions. Next, the router should pull from, it's specified actually in 68 something or other, should pull once an hour at worst from the cache. But note that the cache can notify the router we stole from DNS and say, hey, I've got some tasty new data. And the router can pull them. So it can be pretty responsive. That makes end-to-end in well under a day, a matter of hours at most. And that's kind of the goal. Okay. And I believe that's all I've got to say. So what's the mic cue? You gonna run it, Chris?
I can. So far, nobody has spoke up. Anybody have questions?
Oh, Tim and RB, you were from last time. Gotcha.
Going once, going twice. No questions. Okay. Next. Next, we'll be back on time almost. This is Tim.
Okay. Yes. Right. Thanks. I was going to ask for the slides. So I want to do a quick talk about deprecating rsync and moving to RDP. I made a document that I presented in the last face-to-face meeting. And since then, I had discussion with Randy and George, and they've come on board as well. This is not a working group document yet, but a spoiler is that I will ask for that formally on the list later. Click, please. And next, yeah. So what is the goal here? I think it would be good to remove the dependencies on rsync for RPI validation for all parties involved, at least from a, like, say, a 24/7 on a 24/7 basis. Click. Why? I don't want to spend too much time on this, unless people want to discuss more. Then at the end we can do so. rsync is a great tool, but I think it's it can be heavy on the server side, especially when the relationship is asymmetric and there's many clients to the server. And this can lead to delays of API content making it to routers. From the validation software point of view, rsync libraries are lacking. Some people have made their own. Most people just use whatever is on the system. And yeah, as I was saying earlier, atomic deltas are hard. You can publish things in a new directory and change things around, but there can be race conditions when people are syncing in the middle of that. So next, please. Like RDP was proposed as an alternative or an additional thing to begin with. It allows for scaling with CDNs. HTTPS client libraries exist in almost all languages, and it deals with deltas. Click. There are constraints though. If we say we want to move away from rsync, we have rsync. We have to deal with this, and things have to keep working. We cannot just tick all the wheels of the bus and let it crash. We have to do this carefully. So next, please. So phase one. This is basically what the world look like today? rsync is mandatory and RDP is optional. RDP is supported by most repositories at the moment, actually, and most reliant parties, but not all. Proposed phase 1 is, next please. Proposed for phase 1 is that, well, there would be an update to, got which RFC number for a moment, sorry, but the RPKI infrastructure document, where it now says you must support rsync. There would be an addition that says you must now also support RDP as a repository server. This is something that should be verified before we could move on to the next phase. Click, please. When all RPKI repositories support RDP, well, current text says, well, let's then ask, well, make it a must for reliant parties to use RDP, and even go further and say that they must not use rsync. This might go a bit far for some people, but the reasoning behind that is that if we want to remove the operational obligation to run an rsync server, then I think you have to do this. The other side to this is you need to do measurements, of course. You need to know whether reliant parties, not only whether reliant party software has made changes, but also whether people deployed it. And then eventually, next slide, please.
Just before you go, George has a question which may be for this slide.
Oh, sure.
I can do my question at the end.
Okay.
Okay, next slide, please. Then at the end, you can say, well, repositories must support RDP, but may support rsync. So that would remove the operational obligation to run rsync. Although I do see a use for still running rsync, and if it's not like try to find the words here. It's not that hard to run an rsync server that people can access to look at objects. But it's much harder to guarantee that it's available as a high availability service. And that's what I'm worried about. So with regards to validation, I think it would be good that validators did not depend on it, but it doesn't mean that people cannot run an rsync server. I would think that that's not that hard to do if you don't have that constraint that everybody validating must be able to access it all the time. So that's why I phrase this as a may for the moment. Obviously, this is all introduction to discussion, hopefully more discussion later. Which brings me to the end, and I think there's one more slide or two. Yeah, so this is just a recap of what I just said. Let's not spend more time here now. That might be useful for discussion. Next, I think that's all I had. Yeah, process. I think it would be good to have a discussion about this. I also would like to ask for adoption, but I'll do that on the list because that's where it should be done. And then process questions are also, well, currently this document includes a plan, a proposed plan, and proposed updates to RFCs for each of those phases. This may not be the best way to do things, but I think it helps to keep everything together to discuss at this stage. But later on, we may well find that it's better to separate out these documents into a plan and different documents updating RFCs for different phases. But anyhow, that's all I had to say about this for now. So I'm happy to discuss things here now on this or later on the list.
Okay. I think it's George, Randy, and Natalie in that order.
So my question is probably not material. It's just the observation. Do we want the formalism of the ordering of the fetch URIs in the published ASN1, because I don't personally believe it's a high likelihood that the order of presentation in the ASN1 affects the decision logic in a relying party validator about how it fetches. But the prior experience in the DNS's order of presentation of data elements actually does affect what people do.
Should I say something about that? Well, essentially RDP has its own object identifier. It's just different access method, essentially. So it's not an ordering of schemes. But if the ordering of these things, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if I understood your question correctly, but I'm advocating a change to using the other method.
I absolutely support adoption and process change to mandate use of RRDP and deprecate rsync. But during the transitional period when certified products are produced that have to publish where am I found, is it not a set of where am I found URIs? I believe it's a set. Well, set or sequence doesn't make much difference, but the question was, does the order of the presentation of these OID denoted objects matter? And my gut feel is no, because the direction to the RP is, if you're given both, please use RRDP first. The problem for a relying party is that when fetch fails, what do you do? And as an operator of a publication point, I can tell you, I see the same IP addresses doing both protocols.
Sorry, Rob, I'm just cutting in for clarification. George, Tim actually told you something that may have been obscure there. It's not actually a list. Because of the implementation details in terms of the ASN1, it's actually two separate databases, not databases, but there's actually two separate buckets of where the URIs are. They have different OIDs. So as a practical matter, all the implementations I know about treat them separately and aren't going to treat them as an ordered list based on the text here. So I don't think it matters. There could, of course,
Great,
be
thank you.
there comes up with a new one.
May I?
I can only assume we lost someone.
Tim, are you still there?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I wasn't sure that it was up to me to say to people to come to the mic. But I think Randy also raised his hand in that case. Randy, did you have another comment?
It's possible Randy fell off. He's still there. He's just not saying anything. So Natalie, why don't you go, and then if Randy shows up again, he can speak up.
Okay, Tim, I might be stretching this here a bit, but if the draft name is deprecating rsync, and when I look at this slide and I see repositories rsync optional and relying parties rsync none, I would like to opt already for the last phase to be rsync repositories none. Because we all know how it goes when you have to maintain stuff. If you think it's optional, people will expect it. And I would then, in that case, at that very stage, would rather get rid of it, or at another phase, phase 4, where the repository is optional then becomes none. End of remark.
Right. Well, I'm not completely decided on this, to be honest. What seems most important to me is that you don't have to have a rsync repository available all the time for validation to work, and that when writing validation software, you don't have to have to support rsync because it's an additional code path that may depend on things being installed that you don't have control over. That was my mind about it. That being said, I'm not against rsync repositories being available, especially for other purposes. But yeah, I think this is a question to be discussed. I mean, if all we end up doing is that there are now two mandatory mechanisms, then yeah, I'm not sure that it's going to bring all that much value.
Ben?
Should I say next, or Natalie, did I answer your question? Like, do you have a follow-up comment on that?
No, I'm good. I'm done. Thanks.
All right, then I guess, unless anybody in particular wants, yeah, who's this?
Ben and Rudiger.
Yeah.
And me after them.
Yes. So Ben is highest, I guess. So Ben can start, I suppose.
Ben may be muted.
Ben, do you want to talk?
Rudiger?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. If you if we run in parallel two mechanisms, obviously that kind of creates also the question, well, okay, what's the consistency between the two representations? And as remarked earlier, inconsistency can happen. They should not. Now, Tim, your point for phase 3 is there should be no operational reliance on the rsync, which kind of makes the inconsistency a little bit moot. But you are saying, yeah, well, okay, we might want to keep the rsync around for kind of non-operational other requirements. And yes, I could imagine that it might be a nice thing to be able to query pointwise into the repository system for specific objects. But yeah, well, one might imagine actually that for after identifying the use cases for such access, rsync might be a way of doing it, but it might also be that one actually chooses some other mechanism, whether it is some API, whatever, or other protocol might be a solution where, well, okay, the consistency at least just disappears. So that's it.
Yeah. I have one comment about that, but so great to have this discussion. Looking forward to more online, I guess. Part of where I'm coming from is that there are rsync URIs defined in the standards, and they're really convenient because objects, when they have names, it's much easier to talk about them and figure out what's going on. And if there's nothing available at all, that might raise some eyebrows, although there are parallels with XML where namespaces are defined with HTTPS URIs, and there may not be anything there. I just think it's convenient if you can get an object. All that's being said and done, the URIs are included in RDP. And if you parse the XML and you parse the base64 in it, you can find all these objects as well. It's just a little bit more work. And with that, I'll just pass on to the next person. There's still anybody else? Chris, you have were you queuing?
I think my thing doesn't matter, but if Ben's back to working mic? Three, two, one. Maybe Ben use the chat. Meanwhile, we'll skip to the next person. So he has Cones, who I.
Yes. Hello. I guess you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Let's just move to the next slide. And we're here to talk about this, which is not a SIDROPS draft. And we just resumed work on AS cones, and similar work is being performed here in SIDROPS with ASPA or ASPA. So it's also good to get feedback from other working groups. We've had, I think in the last couple of days, a series of feedback coming in from this working group that we didn't get from Pro. So what has happened? Next, please. So I'll be quick here. What has happened? We have a new additional author. We have Melchior, who has joined me and Joop. We have looked at the security model because we were told that that was the culprit of what we had to work on. And together with that, we have looked at a couple of new models for building prefix lists. So for actually using then the AS cones. So what does this mean? So let's look at the security model in the next slide. Basically, when you add an AS cone to another AS cone, this requires an acknowledgement. If the holder, the owner of the AS cone you're trying to add to your AS cone doesn't acknowledge it, this is not a visible change. So this avoids anyone adding anything random to their own customer cone, which means we're going to add a little bit more security to what we have now in AS sets. On the other hand, if you add an ASN only to an AS cone, the acknowledgement is optional. And why do we have this? This is because the idea is to keep it simple for those stub ASNs at the edge of the internet where they don't have to do anything. And they might not even know that they have something to do. The acknowledgement is registered in the AS cone as a Boolean value in validated field for each entry. So we have a value that can be 0 or 1. And based on this, we build a way to build filters. On the next slide, please. Let's see how this turns out to be. Okay, so you get basically loose, that is you have 4 ways of building the prefix lists. Loose, opportunistic, almost strict, and strict. For loose, we get any ASN, any AS cone in the AS cone indicated by your downstream, so you get everything. In opportunistic, you get any ASN and any AS cone, but for the ASNs, you only pick the ones that have the validated field set to 1, so the ones that are validated. So what you do is you say, give me in this AS cone all the validated entries, only the validated entries. Then we look at almost strict. That's the next step. You walk the tree of your customer cone, and you once you find an entry that is not validated, you remove the entire subtree, which means you basically punish that customer or sub-customer so that they could go back and say, tell their customers to validate their entries. And then strict is the one where you only consider an AS cone if each and every entry has been validated. So these are recent additions that we did to the draft. So if you're interested in this, I would suggest go and have a look. But why am I also presenting here? Because I want to connect to the next presentation. And next slide, please.
Before you go, there's a question which may be for this slide or the previous.
Oh, yes.
So over
Yes.
MIT right here.
Okay, please.
I'm okay to wait until the end of slides.
Oh, okay. So there are possibilities of integrating this with ASPA HASPA. The two ideas have a lot in common. One looks one way, the relationships, the other one looks the other way around. And maybe it could be worth considering unifying them or just building something to make the two systems interoperable. And the reasoning behind this is also while implementations need to be made at one point for one or the other, or maybe, it would make sense to have both at the same time. So we might try to make the two go hand in hand and allow the operators to just do one single implementation for both of the object types and the systems. So with this, I'm done, and I'm happy to get questions.
Alex, Steve Kent, and then Job.
Okay, Alexander Azimov. So I will not address the last slide where you are speaking about ASPA integration because it's a broader question and we can discuss it offline. My main question is about this idea of some kind of inheritance between IS cones. So let's say that I have a customer and this customer is another customer. So there is a sequence of 3. And what should I do if this second level customer have an IS cone and it is not verified by my direct customer?
So you mean the customer of the customer has not verified its...
Yeah. So the problem of the inclusion of IS cones or IS sets. So and what I know about the current IS set deployment, it's getting worse and worse when we are going from tier 1s to the edge. And there is little chance that you will be able to fix the edge. And from the edge, there will be more errors. And so you will be just learning and getting a broken IS cone as you are getting now broken IS sets.
Okay, so if that ASN, so the customer of your customer is a stub, like they don't provide any transit, they don't need to have an AS cone.
You never know. He may have providing some small transit or something like this.
Okay.
Everybody's using AS set.
Yeah, if they provide transit, then they should have a cone, and then at that point they should know they have to basically their transit would include them in their cone, and then they would acknowledge that. They would have to acknowledge that. So the idea is that they would get a sort of a notification, like an email or something else from their from the RIR where the holder of the AS cone comes from, and they have to go in and check a box that says I'm okay, and my AS cone gets inserted in here. If they know they had to create an AS cone, then they should know at this point that they need to acknowledge their AS cone being inserted into someone else's AS cone.
So just to summarize, my concern is that the core difference between AS cone approach and the ASPA approach is that in ASPA, the relying party is your provider. And with some extent, you can believe to your provider. In AS cone, your relying party is the cone of your customers. I don't believe in such relying party, but we can discuss it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's my misunderstanding.
I think we should discuss this. So next one was
Steve Kent.
Steve.
Hi, this is Steve. Could you go back, I think, at least 2 slides? Yes. So what concerns me is the term validated and the corresponding Boolean data structure. This seems to be a validation that's asserted by the entity publishing this object, but I, as a relying party, am merely trusting them to have correctly asserted that it's been validated, I think, and that concerns me a lot. What we've tried to do throughout the RPKI is to avoid circumstances where possible, where any operator can make an assertion that can't be appropriately validated or verified, let me say, using the strict hierarchic assignments for ASNs and address space that's the backbone of this. So am I misunderstanding? Is it in fact possible for the entity publishing an AS cone to turn on that validated field, but I, as a relying party, really have no way of determining if the validated status is correct?
No, that happens on the in the database itself. It's not for me as the holder of an AS cone to validate the entries in there. So I add, let's say I have my AS cone and I add you in there. I add your AS cone in there. You would receive a notification from the let's say the RIR where I am from, where my ASN is registered, because the AS cone pertains to that database. And you would have to go and say, okay, I'm okay with you adding my AS cone to your AS cone because I'm a customer of yours. And then the validated field would change from 0 to 1.
And who changes that validated field?
The RIR.
Yeah, that's my concern.
Okay.
You're mixing a combination of an activity by an RIR with another database into the RPKI. I think for this to be viewed as secure, a different approach needs to be taken to propagate this information in a fashion that all relying parties can make use of. Just an observation.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to discuss this further. It's we know this is not perfect. We know this needs to be improved, and we're happy to get any feedback about this. Thank you. Joop?
Joop Snijders, NTT. Can you go to your last? Can you go to the last slide? Yeah. So about integrating the two, in my mind, AS cones is let's call it a thought experiment to see if we can migrate some functionality that exists in the IRR, but not in the RPKI, from the IRR to the RPKI, because AS sets are commonly used. Now, ASPA, on the other hand, is an attempt to automate peer lock file configurations. At least that's what I hope to get out of it. And I think those two serve very different goals of different applications, different positions in how we construct filters on eBGP sessions. So I'm not seeing an integration path, given that the purpose and intent of the two approaches is very different. And I also don't think it would reduce work in any meaningful sense to combine the efforts. So my preference would be to keep the two efforts separate and just see how things go from there.
Okay.
End of comment.
Okay, thanks. Next one is George, I think.
Hi. So I am really echoing a comment I have said to Job when he first talked about AS cones. Section 2 of your draft states the objects are stored in ASN1 and are digitally signed according to the same rules and conventions applied for RPKI ROA objects. ROAs are only signed by address holders. They are not signed by ASN. So if your intent is to make an assertion that is checkable against the rights of an ASN holder, the question that I put to Job at the time, and I'd repeat here, is who signs? Because I believe your policy definition component is not a policy statement of the address holder, it's a policy assertion of the ASs. And so you probably need to modify the semantic intent behind signing to clarify who signs. That was it.
Yeah, thank you. I was taking notes. Yeah, so thank you.
Rudiger, Randy.
Hi, Massimo. The security model still looks quite dubious, and George's remark that the signing relation is at least wrongly documented is potentially just one indicator of it. Quite clearly, the AS cones are supposed to be statements about the policy of an AS. So it has to be signed by the AS and originating from that resource path. The validated bits are obviously a very interesting thing with regard to the security model. Now, this is the point where I could see how ASPA and AS cones meet, because you could imagine a system where you do AS cones and essentially the AS cone objects don't by themselves don't have the validated bits, but the validated bits are collected by looking at the ASPAs that are confirming which are the client ASs of a transit provider. But that does not look like something that's going to fly nicely. That looks like a plane designed like a pig, and yes, we know pigs can fly. We just have to apply sufficient thrust. Thanks.
Thank you. And Randy, let's see if the mic works.
Hello, 1, 223?
Yep.
Yeah.
Woo, woo. Hi, I'm Randy. I'm an ASZ addict. One of the earliest ones. We should also note that Yob is an ASZ addict. And so on and so forth. And so we really would like authentic ASZs. But those of us with even small bits of security clue do not understand the authentication model here, never have, even though it keeps changing. So one way to poke at that issue in today's presentation is you have a number of parties, each acting through a number of agents to construct approval. How is that redrawn or deconstructed? I am no longer Yob's customer. I moved to Chris. How is my removal from Yob's AS code unwound?
We have also worked that out in the new version of the draft, actually. And if you are the holder of an AS cone that's inserted in another AS cone, you can just ask to be removed. You just ask for removal, and then it just gets removed. While
and then it doesn't do it.
Sorry?
I need to be able to formally revoke. Ask is not a verb.
No. You don't.
I have to formally remove it from your AS cone. Somebody fetching that AS cone must be able to show that it is invalid.
Yeah, we have thought about that, and you can remove yourself from another your AS cone from another AS cone. You can do that. And a holder can remove you as well. So have a look at the latest draft, at the 02 version, and you'll see that we have thought about that. There is wording about that.
Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else? We'll skip on to the next.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And the last, it should be, choose Alexander.
Okay.
Slides are coming. There you go.
Black font. Okay.
Oh, wait.
Sorry.
Wait. That's a standard problem for me. Okay, now we're better.
It's okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Alexander Azimov. I work for Yandex, and here will be a very quick update on ASP-related drafts. Next slide. So here is our plan for today. I'm going to give you a quick overview of recent changes in the drafts, discuss a few left questions, and show results of the evaluation that was done in Yandex Network. Next. As you may know, the original ASP followed a raw design. It had multiple records for each custom autonomous system, which together formed a set of candidates for the verification procedure. To prevent possible synchronization issues, we changed semantics of ASP object. So that a record will have a sequence of providers, and there must be only one record per custom autonomous system. This guarantees atomicity of updates in the rears. The second part of this atomicity is RTR protocol. Next. The suggested ASP PDU directly reflects the object. So when we have an update for selected autonomous system, it replaces the stored record, both in the cache and in the router, though no race condition may happen. There are a couple of questions that haven't been resolved yet. First one, how we should work with default-free networks, such as T1s. There are two possible solutions for such a scenario. We may follow row 0 style or use empty set. Speaking for myself, I have no preference in this matter. Randy votes for the empty set. If nobody will stand up and shout that they want to keep with the space 0, Randy will win. Another and more important question: should we have different ASP records for IPv4 and IPv6? To give a proper answer, I made a small research to study the difference between customers in IPv4 and IPv6. Next, please. So how I did it? I took a known set of tier 1s, which have peering connections with each other. If I saw a path with two tier 1s present, I considered all rightmost path as an upstream path. If I saw a single tier 1 in the path, the result was nearly the same, with the exception that there is no guess about the link between, as in this drawing, between A1 and T1. The flow path should consist of customer to provider pairs, but there is some noise from the route links. The level of this noise was out of the scope of this research, but it is expected that it will not have significant impact on the comparison results. Next. So, what we got? As you can see from the drawings and from the numbers, there is still significant difference between IPv4 and IPv6 connectivity, which justifies different ASP records for different address families. I hope that RTR protocol will change its PDU with the next update. Next. Now, evaluation. The basic idea was to check algorithms described and in the verification draft at scale. So I created next setup. I collected BMP data from border routers and used npm CCT, thanks to Paula, to parse and organize the flow of data. In addition, I created 18 ASP records, which represent ASP0 for well-known T1s, and also I specified ASP records for Yandex. Next. And here is an example of what we got. On the drawing, you can see Magia leak by Viettel. I was also able to confirm this incident with data plane monitoring. About the drawing is an example of another kind. The ASP logic is capable to detect leaks that are coming from providers. In addition, BMP feed of HRIB-in gives easy access to paths that may include your own autonomous system number. Together, it gives a way to detect leaks that are happening for your own address space. Previously, such monitoring could be done only with external data sources. You can see examples of invalid ICE paths for Yandex address space that were detected during last month. And the next final slide. So, where we are now, the foundation seems to be ready. We have 3 documents that together represent ASP object, verification procedure, and RTR PDU. There are a few questions that still need to be resolved, but I do not see any showstoppers. We have implementation on top of board, and now large-scale check of ASP logic that was done inside the Yandex network. That's proof to have value beyond original expectations. So it has value that is more than described in the draft currently. I feel that after some work on the text, we should be ready for working group last call. Any questions, suggestions, comments, please?
Rüdiger? Rudiger Volk, you're up.
Sorry, it's really hard to unmute. Small question on the ASN1 change. Why is use of a sequence and not of a set type proposed? Set type, I think, would be very appropriate and obviously also would enable the empty set to be used for something.
Yes, we can use the set. I don't see any problem here, and empty sequence and empty set have nearly same semantics.
So this is Russ. I'd like to object to that.
Okay.
Do not use a set there. While it does have the semantics Rudiger wants, the DER encoding requires sets to be sorted, and you just don't need the hassle.
Okay.
Job?
In the last slide, it was suggested that perhaps things should move towards working group last call. But I would like to ask the group that we go a little bit slower. As it currently stands, this working group has significant work ahead of itself to improve the validation strategy around manifests and CRLs. And from a time perspective, I would like to do a similar evaluation as you have done here, but in NCT's context, to be able to support the documents or point out that there are some corner cases that are problematic. My fear is that if we go into working group last call, we exceed the available bandwidth of the working group and perhaps individuals such as myself. So my request would be that we go slower so we can carefully analyze what exactly this does before we go into working group last call.
So I would agree that we may need another verification. To make my point clear, I was not asking for the working group last call the next day. If, for example, you have time to check the logic of SPE inside your network, great. If you can give us some other guys that are ready, it will be even better. The more testing we will have around ASP, the more chances that we will not need fixes, ad hocs, and then other funny things.
And I want to extend a compliment to you. I think how you are approaching whether ASPA is a viable concept or not and running these types of evaluations is very cool. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Andy?
Andy, Marcus, and IJ. I think the discussion of CRLs and manifests is entirely orthogonal. The working group has been doing almost nothing. Talking about other people's resources is something I try not to do. So I'd rather just focus on ASPA. I think, as Alexander said, having somebody else part of it in their network would be brilliant. But I think part of the inclination to a last call is that seems to be the only way to get people to read drafts. So that's why I think whatever it takes to get people to read it, whatever it takes to get you to play with it, is a win. And
Okay. Is there anything else?
There is one thing that I've missed on the last slide. I would like, so when I was just checking the status of IETF update, I found out that the draft is still pending approval from the chairs. I was surprised, and I think it's something that can be easily fixed.
Okay, we can certainly do that. Yunnan?
Yes. Hi, Alex. So I have a question, which I had when I was reading your drafts, which is not quite related to your today's presentation. I'm not sure if it's been asked or being answered. So I'm wondering, how do you represent the lateral peering relation using, the ASPA profile or object? I mean, do you use two different pairs, like two C2P pairs to represent a P2P pair? Or you just don't represent the P2P relations?
One of the key ideas of these drafts is that we do not represent P2P pairs at all. The only thing is the ASPA object is described is customer and a sequence of upstream providers.
Mm-hmm. So that being said, when we have like two successive P2P links, for that situation, the ASPA verification won't be able to, detect the leak, right?
No, the ASPA will be able to detect such misconfiguration, because we will look at if we are receiving a prefix from a peering link, we're expecting that all sequence in the ICE path represents customer to provider pairs. And two peer-to-peer links bound to each other will be an invalid path in these terms. And so, that's why it's enough to use only customer to providers registration to detect such misconfiguration.
Did you just say you are able to detect the two successive P2P links?
Yes, it's possible, and it's working from box.
How?
Once again, let's say you have three autonomous system numbers: autonomous system 1, autonomous system 2, and the autonomous system 3. The autonomous system 3 is a receiver. Yes. And autonomous system 1, autonomous system 2, and autonomous system 3 are peers. Maybe peering with each other. So according to the draft, when a prefix is received by autonomous system 3 from autonomous system 2, it will be treated as a prefix that is the path should be upflow path. So
yes,
it will be expecting that autonomous system 1 and autonomous system 2 is customer and provider. But if autonomous system 1 is signing ASPA, autonomous system 2 will not be included in the list because they are peers. And using this data, autonomous system 3 will be able to detect the leak that happens for address space that belongs to autonomous system 1. So autonomous system 2 doesn't need to cooperate.
Okay, I think I can take the question, to the mailing list.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Doug, do you want to ask your question?
I was just asking how you can tell partial deployment, a missing ASPA data on some links from a lateral leak.
For a partial deployment, there are two scenarios. First scenario is when there is a mistake. If there is a mistake, as I described a few minutes ago, it's not a big deal, because if we have a signing party somewhere in the path, the receiver will be able to detect a leak in most cases. If we are speaking about malicious activity, at the partial deployment, to secure your path, you need a secure upflow path to tier 1s. If you are tier 1, the situation is simple. Just create what is now called ASP0, or one day will be named ASP empty, something like this. If you are tier 2, to secure your path, you need to make your upstream providers to sign ASP empty, in addition to your own ASP rates, and so on for tier 3, tier 4, and whatever. But in the real world, the security problems are not the biggest problem at the moment. But anyway, the opportunity for partial deployment still exists even for security issues when the leak is malicious intent. Doc? I see it in the chat. I don't hear the reply.
Oh, it's okay. Both of your scenarios, you talked about errors and sort of malicious intent. I was just talking about good old partial deployment. So I get your point, right? Is you need a chain of ASPA records to the tier 1, and that
for security, yes.
Right.
For getting benefit, no.
Okay, we can talk about it on the list.
Okay, sure. And another question.
Last question.
Yeah, for partial deployment, I could view things like, well, where we do not have the deployment at the edge. Well, it's the choice of the AS whether they want to protect or not, to do the ASPA or not. And yes, for having the full path checked, of course, the partial deployment does not protect when you does not protect fully when you transit some networks that do not do ASPA and protect for you none. I think ASPA as it stands is fine and very helpful. For protecting peering relations, one could consider doing essentially the same data structure as ASPA for ASs that want to protect their external relations being checked in AS paths observed elsewhere by doing essentially the same data structure and listing their peers where they authorize the appearance of the peers in the AS path. But that would be essentially a completely different RPKI assertion than the ASPA. It would just be structurally this, or could be done structurally as the same. And I would not suggest going there until we have actually transferred the ASPA into RFC status.
And I will
thank you for your
sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So okay, I will follow up. So I would like to highlight that the signing peers have another kind of problem, and the problem is called transparent access. When you have a lot of peers, when you, and you happen to be directly peering according to the ICE path, but you never know the full list.
Yes, kind of using the peer authorization set would essentially preclude using transparent root servers for peering.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll talk to you both on the mailing list.
Sure.
Okay.
Any
I think
input
we are
related to ASP is very welcome.
we're just about out of time. So if there's any last questions? I think that there's some discussion to be had in a follow-on. So I think we'll try and gather up some agenda items if there are any, and propose maybe in 3 weeks about the same time another interim meeting, which again probably only attend if there's stuff that you're concerned about. Hopefully, sound good? As I ask people not reply because of the mic. Okay, we'll talk about it on the mail list. I think that's it for today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.